let's take a look at comparing databases. So to start with, we have the 2021 beta version of SchemaDrift available here. And when it starts up, it'll remember what you had connected to previously. But if you want to connect and compare some databases, we'll start by connecting here to SQL Server. I'm going to use SQL authentication, put in my username and password. And then once we're connected, we can go and choose which database we're going to compare. And in this case, I'm going to compare this database called Demo CPS. And then what I'm going to compare it to, I'm going to select the destination. I will connect to that same SQL server again and choose for the database this CPS fixed. And this is a practice that I did for a corruption repair. So there's a couple of things that are a little bit different between these two tables because it was a demo I did to rehearse fixing corruption. So once we've done that, we can take a look, and there's some options down here where we can do things like ignore fill factor or ignore collation or extended properties or ignore white space, little things that may not be needed to be considered in your comparison. And then down at the bottom, there's a bunch of check boxes of what we want to compare. If you wanted to compare everything except for stored procedures, maybe you just uncheck that, for instance, or you uncheck everything but stored procedures if you simply wanted to look at the differences between the stored procedures. So then once that's ready, we hit compare. We then run it, and this will run for a couple minutes. And what it does is it goes and scans each of the databases and looks at each of the objects in the database and compares the structure of all of those things. Now, it's not looking at any of the data in the tables. It's not looking at any, this is a medical database, but it's not looking at any patient data or anything like that. It's simply looking at the structure of the database, the tables, but not what's in those tables, for instance. Then when that runs for a while, we have the completed version, which I ran ahead of time just so that we wouldn't have to wait and wait for that to finish. And once it's complete, you get a number of different tabs that show up here. We can look and see what are the objects in this database that are totally identical. So there's some assemblies in there, which is compiled code. Here's a table that between the first database and the second database, this app blocks table is totally identical. And you can just scroll down through here and see that there's lots and lots of things that are shown in green as identical. Look at what's different. And here's a list of all of those things that are different. And I'll just pick one of these, like this table called allergy, which is for recording patient information on their allergies. Roll down here, and what we can see is the difference between these two tables. The only difference is on two triggers, and these triggers have been disabled. And that's a side effect of what we did when we did our corruption repair. This was kind of a test run through that we went through. I should have re-enabled them when I was done, but I didn't. I just wanted to leave something there that would stand out as to catch what was different there. So what we're seeing on this table, there's two triggers that are shown in yellow that are what's different. And because of the nature of this database, these two databases we're comparing and that they went through a database corruption repair, we're going to see the same thing on all the tables where all the triggers in this specific database are showing up as disabled versus being enabled, which just indicates that I need to go through, if I want them to match, to go and re-enable those triggers and turn them back on. Now we can look at things that are only in the source, and there's some extra tables that got put into this original database here because I actually configured it and used it for SQL Server replication. And when I did that, replication ended up adding a few of the tables that were needed there. And we can see that those don't exist in the destination. And if we wanted to move those over to the destination, we could right click here and we could say, add this table to the other database. And it would go and run that create script on the other database and move it all over. Or we could say copy all scripts. And since that copied is the clipboard, I'm just going to open Notepad here and I can paste it in there. And you can see that we now have the create script that we can take and copy and run in the other database to get the databases to match up. So if you were to take this script, run it on the secondary database, and then rerun the differences here using SchemaDrift, you would then be able to see that they matched after making those changes. Things that we can see that are only in the destination, these are two tables that I was experimenting, well, one that I was tracking some corruption repair with, and the other was a table that I was experimenting on making some changes with. And if we wanted to take those and move those back to the original database, we could say add this table to the other database, and that would move it over and put it into the original database. So we could then get them synced up and matching. Or if you realize looking at this that this was just something you were playing around with, like this table happens to be for me, that I really don't want to have it go back to the original database and I don't want it in the destination database, I could then go and drop it from the destination database just to clean it up so that the databases would then be matching. This is really super handy anytime that you're making changes in the database to be able to go and see what's identical, what's different, what's only on one side or only on the other side, and then go find those differences and move them from one side to the other. But it gets even better. You have the ability to save the schema to disk, and the way that that works is we would start by doing a comparison. We would connect to the database like we did before. Well, I'm going to pick a different database this time. I'm going to pick the report server database, which is Microsoft's report server. And then instead of comparing to another database, I'm going to compare it to source control or a file system. Where I'm going to save it is, I have a SchemaDrift folder. And what I'm going to do, and that directory is currently empty, I'm going to hit the compare button, and it's going to compare what's in this database to what exists in that empty directory. And then when we run this, hold on, I have the prepared earlier version of it. Bring this one in, slide that one out. Here it is comparing the report server to this file system. And we can see that it was comparing to an empty file system. There's nothing, or an empty folder in that file system. There's nothing there that's identical because nothing exists. There's nothing that's different because there's nothing to compare it to. And it shows that there's only all of these objects in source. There's nothing that's only in the destination. So if we wanted to take that, save it off to the file system, we could then go right click here, and we could say save all to the destination directory. But before doing that, I want to bring up the folder so we can see what it looks like. Okay, so what we have here is an empty folder that is located in that location. I'm then going to click on the list here and save all to the destination directory, save complete. And now you can see in this folder, there's directories created for functions, roles, schemas, stored procedures, tables, users and views, all the things that were found in this database. So if we go and look at tables, and we just open one of them, may as well look at this catalog one, and you can see the create script for that database. Now you could take what we've put in that directory, save it to source control or check it in, and then we could go back and run a comparison again. Just go back to the main setting page, hit compare. It'll run for a minute, and now what it's going to do is compare what's in that database to what we just saved on the file system. And as it runs, we should see that everything is close to a match at that point. So really a handy tool to be able to keep track of what's changing and what's happening with your database, especially if you're working in like a dev and a test environment where you have to move things to production eventually. And then now that that comparison finished, we can see that everything shows up as identical. There's nothing different, nothing in source, and nothing that's only in destination. Everything shows up as identical. So if you're working in a dev environment where you're coding on this database and you want to regularly check it into source control, you could use this, save all the table structures and procedures and all the schema off to disk, commit it to source control, make sure you're not losing anything. That wraps up the introduction. Have a great day and enjoy this free beta of SchemaDrift.